Bob's also another one. All right, everyone's coming in. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Jeff. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Everyone else who came in.
Now I can say hi. I'm unmuted. Okay.
We have our third favorite staff member on the phone call today. Hi, Bob.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Third, huh? Third.
Third, sorry, you just got demoted, Bob.
Well, I was gonna call you.
I'm thrilled.
I was gonna call you second after Anyos, of course, but then I remembered.
But then
Jeff,
Evan.
and it's hard to juggle everybody around. And well, Evan isn't on the phone, so I'm sorry, fourth favorite staff member.
You're right.
Hey, John Hill, remember me?
John, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Right. No, I just want to know, I can't get the red dot. What time does that red dot come on my screen?
What time does the what?
I'm not able to see you. But I just wanted to know, you said if you get a red dot, then it opens up the meeting.
Joe is trying to log in through the city website, and she's asking when the little camera phone comes on so she can stream the meeting through the city website.
Right.
Sebastian's here, so.
Yeah, it usually happens, I think I was told, 30 seconds after we start, Joe.
Oh, all right. Okay. All right.
Let's see.
Thank you.
Let me double check if it's showing up.
Yeah, I'm gonna. How do I get out of this? I'll just hang up on this then. Thank you.
Yeah, the video camera is showing up already, so you might want to just reload your page and it should show up.
Okay, I will do that. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, and we got a message from Lynette that said that she'll be a little bit late.
So we're still missing Michael.
We're just missing Michael. Yep. All right, we're trickling in. Hi, Jerry.
Oh.
Do you guys want to get started and we'll see if Michael will trickle in at some point?
Sure.
Sounds good.
I guess we have a quorum, even though we're missing two, so we'll hope they show up. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Barron, and you just heard from Carrie Tice, where the city council members, and so we'll call the December 17th, 2020 meeting of the Carmel Climate Change Committee to order. And we'll note that Michael LePage and Lynette Zimmerman are missing, but everyone else was here. The first thing on our agenda today is public appearances. Members of the public are entitled to speak on matters of municipal concern not on the agenda during public appearances. Each person's comment shall be limited to 3 minutes or is otherwise established by the committee. Matters not appearing on the agenda will not receive action at this meeting, but may be referred to staff for a future meeting. Persons are not required to give their names, but it is helpful for speakers to state their names so that they may be identified in the minutes of the meeting. Any public comments? Okay, we'll move on to committee member announcements. Any announcements from members of the committee on matters related to climate change? Okay.
Did anybody watch the workshop?
I did, in fact, I watched parts of the workshop a couple of weeks ago. What was that, the Cal OES workshop?
I was thinking about the Coastal Commission workshop today.
I
watched part of that today.
My main takeaway from a couple of weeks ago is the thing that we have to worry about is atmospheric rivers, weather-wise, and I think we're going to hear a lot about that during, I think, both of our presentations today. So that should be pretty interesting. Scott, you said you watched the part of the Coastal Commission meeting today. I was going to go back and watch it later.
Yeah, I was doing a little multitasking with my day job, but yeah, I thought there was some interesting information there. Some of it was around, just how to think about partnering with other cities and kind of state versus local dynamics and things like that. It'd probably be a little longer to go through what I did capture, but I thought there were some interesting bits in there.
Great. So hopefully we'll all go back and watch it, and maybe we can have a little bit of a summary. I'll ask Agnes to take this down, a little bit of a summary next month on sort of comments from committee members going back to watch it.
Okay.
So our first order of business today is to receive a presentation from the United States Geological Survey on the Coastal Storm Modeling System, COSMOS, analysis of the impacts of storms and sea level rise on the Carmel-by-the-Sea shoreline. And I see Andy here. Andy, you can wave at everybody. Welcome. Andy O'Neill is an oceanographer and meteorologist with the USGS Pacific Coastal and Marine Science Center in Santa Cruz. She came to the USGS in 2012 after 10 years of oceanographic and meteorological support for the US Navy in Japan, where much of her work focused on tailored forecasts and climatological products for resource planning and disaster response. That was a lot of long words. Currently, Andy is a member of the Coastal Storm Modeling System, COSMOS team, which studies coastal hazards posed by both sea level rise and storms associated with climate change. In addition to managing the development and implementation of COSMOS across California's coastline, she also investigates the identification and integration of storms into COSMOS's computer simulations. She holds a BS in oceanography from the University of Washington in Seattle and an MS in meteorology and physical oceanography from NPS in California, Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Please welcome Andy. So Andy, you can take it away.
All right. Well, hello, and thank you for having me. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so I can give the presentation. I just want to say that the work that I'll be presenting today is really the culmination of lots of team members. It's a huge team kind of encompassing compatriots in fellow USGS offices, but also across other federal agencies. And so the team members that I've listed here are really the Santa Cruz team members that directly contribute to the projections that you'll be seeing today. So just to start off with, our Earth is warming. The global temperature has been ticking up for some decades now and at a rate above natural factors.
Andrea?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Did you hit present now? Because we can't see it.
I did. Do you not see it?
No.
What do you see?
I see nothing, just our meeting.
All right. Can you see anything now?
No. Try, get out of present. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Oh.
There we go. So now we can see your website. There we go. Now you can see your presentation.
Great. Okay. So there's all the folks from the Santa Cruz office that contribute to the projections that you'll be looking at today. So first slide, yep. Earth is warming, and it's warming, has been warming for some time at rates above natural factors. We know that the temperature is increasing with increasing CO2 and greenhouse gases, and it's in line with processes, that's Earth processes and other scientific processes that we've known about for over 150 years. And we know that these increases in temperature and associated changes are getting more pronounced. Just to show how pronounced, this is a look at the global temperature between 2015 and 2019 compared to global temperature in the 1800s. So it just shows how much warming has happened since pre-industrial times. And it so happens that 2015 and 2019, 5 years in our recent record, the previous 5 years, represent the highest and warmest 5 years on record. And CO2 is at 420 parts per million. That's a level that hasn't been seen for over 200,000 years. And it's increasing at a rate that we haven't seen for over 100 million years. So with these increasing temperatures, we get shifts in the atmosphere, much like when you put a pot of water to boil on the stove and it starts bubbling and creating currents to mix that temperature, that heat around. Our atmosphere, which is just an ocean of air and gas, shifts and creates currents and circulation to mix that heat around. And so that ultimately changes the paths our storms take. So the paths that our storms take obviously can have a huge impact on our daily lives. So those changing patterns and those changing global winds and changes in storms can bring excessive rain to locations that are not built to handle it and cannot adapt. It reduces rainfall to other areas that rely upon it. And then it can actually change the storms themselves, either changing the intensity or changing how often those storms impact an area. So this chart, which is put out by NOAA, is just a look at billion-dollar weather disasters. That is, weather-related disasters that cause at least $1 billion in damage, starting in 1980. And much like our temperature record, it's been ticking up the past few decades, and increasingly so in recent decades. In the past 5 years, again, that 2015 to 2019 time period, the warmest years on record, we've had over $500 billion in weather-related damages alone, with inland flooding and severe storms being increasingly large contributors to that weather-related damage. But these billion-dollar disasters, while really catchy and headline-grabbing, are not the complete story. We can see the impacts of climate change in our daily lives, from increasing drought to increasing nuisance floods and longer fire seasons. And it sounds like you guys have already gone into fire a lot, so with previous meetings, so I don't need to belabor that. So with all these changes, great. How does that affect our coast? The key takeaway is that with warming temperatures, quite obviously, it reduces our ice sheets and our glaciers. That adds all volume to our ocean and also affects the vertical land motion, so how we interface with the ocean right at the coastal boundary where we live. Shifts in that atmospheric circulation, again, change the storm tracks, change the winds, how intense they are, where they blow, and then also the resulting waves, either creating bigger, longer swell in some locations or changing the direction of those waves. Then increasing ocean temperature and changes in those global wind patterns also affect changes in sea surface. The surface of the ocean is not a bathtub, it's not flat, it's got valleys, it's got hills, it's got troughs. And so those changing patterns, again, affect how the ocean impacts us at our boundary, at our coastal boundaries. So there's lots of global changes that contribute to how sea level affects us locally. And much like the climate impacts that we covered earlier, we can see these changes in sea level right on our doorstep, from changing storminess, such as El Nino times. During El Nino periods, we get increased storminess and increased wave action, which then causes increased erosion along our shores and increased nuisance flooding during high tides. These are all pictures of erosion and flooding effects that we see on our Monterey Bay doorstep. So we talked about the big scales and why this is important, but how big is the problem when we're looking at our coastal climate impacts? Well, the coast is a very desirable place to live. By 2100, they estimate that over 1 billion people are expected to live in that coastal zone. But we've got 27 million presently in California living in this coastal area. And so with expected climate impacts, we expect over 600,000 of those people and 150 billion in property, roughly 6% of California's GDP, to be affected by 2100 or at risk of flooding. And so bringing it closer to home and just looking at Santa Cruz and Monterey counties, the initial estimate is that 30,000 residents and 5.5 billion in property are at risk of flooding by that same time period. So the California state has put out guidance, right, to get ahead of this problem. And based on the latest science, we can have some idea of how these global changes will affect us and what global changes are in store for the California coastline. Mainly, it doesn't look like at our latitude there's going to be significant changes in wave height, which is a good thing. And this is very much unlike other locations in the country. But there is a big shift in direction. It looks like some of the most intense waves that we do expect to experience are going to be from more southerly wave directions. We do expect more frequent and extreme El Nino events. And with these El Nino events, we expect an increase in winter erosion associated with that increase in wave energy. And the net effect is basically our current extreme water levels, such as those with a 100-year coastal storm, are projected to occur more often, and with the greatest impacts being on low-level coastal areas. Okay, so that was a whole bunch of bad news that we went through. But I think it's important to know that these shifts and these impacts are not in debate, but we do want to have good information so we know how these changes might affect us, so that we know what is truly at stake, so that we can make smart decisions and allot our resources to take the most effective strategies and protect what we value. So there are several coastal vulnerability approaches to do this, to get an idea of what our true impacts at our local scale are going to be. A common coastal vulnerability approach is a static or bathtub model, which just looks at sea level rise and tides. The NOAA sea level rise viewer is a good example of a static or bathtub model. Basically, just like it says, it's a bathtub. You raise the water level goes in and floods everything that it can, all the nooks and crannies. And this is a great first order screening tool to kind of get a first idea or back of the envelope idea of what's at stake. However, bathtub models can underpredict flooding hazards. Going back to the idea that the sea surface is not a bathtub, it's not flat, especially when we're considering storms and storminess and lots of transiting weather events. We can have up to 5 meters additional height at our coastal zone, right, just at our doorstep, that can affect us. And so dynamic models, which take into account these wind, these waves, atmospheric pressure, and shoreline change, can really give a much more full and descriptive illustration of what our local impacts are going to be. And Cosmos is a dynamic model that does this. So again, Cosmos is just a physics-based numerical simulation system for assessing coastal hazards due to climate change. It looks at a full range of sea level rise options, 0 meters, all the way up to 5 meters of sea level rise, and a variety of storm possibilities. That's everything from background conditions to a 100-year storm. And it was really developed in collaboration with federal, state, and city governments to meet their planning and adaptation needs. So to quickly go over the Cosmos framework, it's basically a framework of nested computer simulations with increasing resolution at each step, which allow us to scale global changes all the way down to the local scale. So at each step, we preserve the changes in wind, the changes in swell, the changes in pressure, so that we can see how it's going to affect us at the local scale. And at the far right, we display these results in easy to use, easy scalable web tools. The first web tool being OCOF, I'll go over that later, looking at just flood results, and a second web tool directly translating those flood results to socioeconomic impacts. So this is just an example of some of the grids that we've used. Excuse me. This is an example of the Carmel and Monterey grid. The particular model or computer simulation program that we use is called Delft3D. Basically, it just allows a full simulation of the water and hydrodynamics and waves to be run through a full storm simulation along with all the appropriate physics and see how it flows around our coast. So in that simulation, within Delft3D, we take into account storm surge, the projected storm surge, astronomic spring tide, Pacific wave height, fluvial discharges, commensurate fluvial discharges, and sea level rise. And we combine all those for our suite of sea level rise, different sea level rises, and different storm conditions. So I should say that that's a typo. It should be 0 to 3 meters and a 5 meter scenario. But basically it gives 40 scenarios that cover a range of sea level rise and storm conditions. And it's a realistic physics-based simulation looking at how all these factors interplay and cause impacts at our coast. So all the impacts, again, are all the influences and all these components are derived from global climate models. So it's a very forward-looking, future-looking model. It's not based on historical weather. So that was just for our flood model, just for the hydrodynamics, the wet stuff, so to speak. Under that, we do account for changes in our coastal zone. That is, the beach is shifting and our cliffs are shifting at the same time with raises in sea level. And we've got two models to account for how that coastal zone in our coast is shifting and changing shape in the future. The first one is looking at shoreline change. It's basically a numerical model that relates shoreline position with storminess, short sediment transport, and sea level. And it uses some really slick statistics to relate that and push it forward into a projection. And it works along transects, and we link the transects up within our model. And the retreat also works on a transects. And rather than using one model, it uses an ensemble of 5 different models to look at the relationship between wave impacts, sea level rise, and historical cliff retreat behavior to implicitly look at how the cliffs may react with increasing wave energy with sea level rise. And again, we blend the cliff retreat projections and shoreline change projections to have a changed coast or an evolved coastline within our flood projections. So now to get to the meat of the presentation, we're looking at the Cosmos flood projection right now for present day sea level, so no sea level rise, but a 100-year storm. And again, this 100-year storm is taken from and identified from the global climate models that account for all those future global changes. So this is a look at the Carmel River area, and we give it 1 meter sea level rise with no storm. Again, this is like background daily conditions that we see every day. They're not as severe as the 100-year storm, but then if we overlay a storm, there's a huge change in that flood footprint that are cold. Again, just to show the impacts of including kind of that dynamic component. So this is expected to be mid-century right now with some of our best scientific projections. However, if we look out to 2100 and a probable 2 meter sea level rise, again, no storm, just looking at average conditions, you can see it's pretty extensive. Then grows again with a 100-year storm. Obviously, the biggest impacts are to the low-lying coastal areas in the lagoon area. And then we're shifting just north to Carmel Beach now. Again, that same color scheme, we're looking at 0 meters of sea level rise and a 100-year storm. We do get kind of inundation all the way to the back of the beach with 1 meter of sea level rise and no storm. This is just kind of your daily average day at the beach conditions. And then with a 100-year coastal storm and 2 meters of sea level rise with no storm, nice day at the beach, and then with our 100-year storm again. So all these projections that I just shown are going to soon be in our web tool. This web tool is the Our Coast, Our Future web tool. And you're able to, much like Google Earth, scale down to particular locations and different geographic scales to look at all the information there and be able to identify hazards and risks for any area. Again, Monterey County has just wrapped up, as it isn't quite in the tool yet, but it will soon be in the tool. I do want to let you know that another output that is going to be in the tool is flood potential. So most of these projections are very definitive, right? It's one solution for all the inputs going in. However, with all these inputs, such as elevation information on our shoreline, there's a certain amount of confidence or uncertainty, right? Even with the best LiDAR, the elevation that I'm able to produce for my shore is plus or minus 18 centimeters is my confidence interval. That can add up. There's a confidence interval with our models. There's a confidence interval with the change projections, and there's also expected vertical land motion going into the 21st century. So if we add up all those sources of possibly a range of values for each of those projections, that can give kind of confidence bounds on our flood projection. So this is our minimum inundation and our maximum inundation. So if you really want to know how confident the results are, or you are more risk averse, you can look at this and see kind of the potentiality of flood if we account for all those possible ranges of values in the projection. Again, looking at the cliff retreat in the shoreline position, that's already in OCOF. And so there are multiple scenarios for the cliff retreat and the shoreline projection. Basically, whether infrastructure holds or infrastructure does not hold, and then the shoreline change has an additional scenario that can take into account implicit nourishment or not. We only use one scenario from each for the flood projections. That is, assuming infrastructure holds and there is no nourishment. But if you want to explore other management scenarios, those are definitely available in OCOF. So we've talked mainly about the physical flood impacts right now. But for a lot of planning that we need to do, we want to know the impacts on our community. So partnering with some of our geographers in USGS, they've been able to take our projections and translate them into socioeconomic impacts. And this is based off community publicly available data at the scale. And so based on this, looking at our projections for, say, a 2 meter at sea level rise and 100-year storm across California, that's where we come out with the 600,000 residents and 150 billion in property at risk. So this is a very valuable tool when looking at planning as well as the physical impacts. So when we talk common sea level rise mitigation strategies, right, you've now looked at your risk, you understand what your potential risk is, and you try and develop your strategies, which usually revolve around some sort of retreat, elevate, block, or restoration of the shoreline that may not get at the complete impacts from that sea level rise. And really, the thing is, there could be impacts to groundwater. And if groundwater is affected, that's basically kind of behind the defenses of each of these strategies. It's inland and it's away from the infrastructure that we're trying to focus on. So as sea level rises, it can raise the interface between the fresh shallow water lens of our coastal aquifers and the elevation of the ground or buried infrastructure that lies above it, either creating emergent and additional flooding, coastal shallowing of the water table, and also saltwater intrusion, which could be a major impact for agriculture. And so we've actually partnered with Kevin Beethus to look at some first order screening tools for groundwater. Again, this is kind of like the bathtub model that I brought up earlier. This is a kind of a back of the envelope, somewhat simplified model so that we can look at the range of options or the range of projections for groundwater. So this is only looking at one kind of water conductivity option. There are several water conductivity options that basically describe how permeable the substrate is. This is a middle of the line option, and this is just looking at our current sea level rise and looking at the groundwater depth in Carmel. With 1 meter sea level rise, when I didn't know that that was going to animate like that, so apologies. But with 1 meter sea level rise, we do see somewhat shallowing of the groundwater depth in the crossroads area around Oliver Road. And with 2 meter sea level rise and then ultimately 3 meters of sea level rise, that you can see that there's some emergent flooding. And so this is far inland from where we were looking at our marine-driven coastal flooding impacts. So it's just allowing us to highlight that there may be other impacts beyond just the physical flooding projected in Cosmos. And so these projections are now fully available online, and I have a contact at the end of the presentation that's willing to answer questions about it. So this is just a obligatory slide on what makes Cosmos unique. Again, it's a physics-based, explicit, dynamic model to better illustrate the impacts of climate change at our coast. And with that, I just want to say thank you, that all the projections are complete, and Monterey County is going to be coming online soon. And answer questions if anybody has them at this point.
Thank you, Andy. That was a content-filled presentation. I have a bunch of questions, but do we have other questions from the committee members? Anybody?
Yeah, this is Scott. I guess I just had, was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about the coastal erosion modeling. It sounds like you can make an assumption about whether Armory holds or not. And
yes, yeah, there are multiple scenarios for each model. So the cliff model and the shore model are two different models. And the cliff model has two scenarios. Basically, one assumption is that Pat Limber's the guy who developed this model, and he has an extensive database of coastal armoring. So he took the coastal armoring database, and one management scenario is that all the armoring holds as intended. We make no assumptions on the durability or structural viability of that armoring, right? We maintain it through the 21st century, and that is one management scenario. Basically, if there's armoring, there's no retreat. The other management scenario is we assume there's no armoring now. That's either degradation of the structural viability or it wasn't maintained. And with that, you can see the retreat possible projected with sea level rise at those locations.
okay, thank you.
Would you be able to show us on that?
Yeah. All right.
So related to that question from Scott.
Yeah.
We have, a lot of armoring along our beach, and I see that looks like is that our beach?
That is your beach, yeah.
So if you look at the top of the screen, there's a sandy slope right there. That's the big slanty slope that goes up to Ocean Avenue, and then Pescadero Creek is sort of at the top.
Yeah.
Are you guys, how would we get sort of modeling with regards to what's going to happen to our sandy slope into the future?
So what happens here?
Yeah, so in the sandy slope area that's not armored, which we have, a couple hundred yards of ocean frontage. We have facilities on that slope. There's a restroom, there are volleyball courts, there's all sorts of stuff over there. Is the USGS the source of sort of us being able to predict what's going to happen to that sandy slope? Would we hire a consultant to do that?
I think depending on how much, so I think some of the information that exists within Cosmos now, and I'm trying to show you let's look at the shoreline projection. It's really light color, so let me know if it shows up on the screen. Oh, it's zoomed.
Yeah, that's exactly the right area of which I was speaking.
Yeah, so at 0 centimeter sea level rise, there should be a really light line that comes up here. This is just kind of like a baseline line. And at 50 centimeter sea level rise, it's acting slow right now. I wonder if it's because I'm also on here. I'm just maxing out my bandwidth. Is it going to come up? Let me zoom out and see. There you go. So 50 centimeter sea level rise. This may not be quick, so just be patient.
So while it's coming up,
yeah,
presumably when the sea level rises on our sandy slope, that big sandy area that you've kind of seen that's now in the middle of the screen,
yeah,
that sandy slope is going to tend to want to retreat, correct?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
as the bottom sand is undermined, the whole thing is going to sort of slough off into sort of in the direction of the water.
Yeah, well, so the beach changes, right? And so if there's area for it to move and respond and shift back, it tends to. Much like you get the changing beach and the beach moving back and forward, even between winter and summer, right? Very different profiles when you visit the beach, right? With a raise in sea level, you can start getting that active zone of the beach, that part of the beach where the wave wants to deposit sand and or take sand. It's going to be shifting back if there's room for it to do so. And if there's kind of an accommodation space for it to shift, that's what it will do if it has enough sediment to do so. The really big impacts come into play as if there's no longer any space for it to shift. At that point, it can become inundated, right? It can't move anywhere. It can't respond. It can't build up, maybe build a bigger dune. And so at that point, it becomes inundated. And I think you actually see a reflection of this a little bit with the flooding. So this finally showed up. We have 50 centimeters of sea level rise. Here's kind of the confidence bounds. Again, it accounts for storminess. It's done at a daily time scale. So the shoreline's going to be somewhere in here for 50 centimeters of sea level rise. If we move it to 200, and hopefully it won't take it too long to load, it moves back.
Okay.
There you go. It moves back. And this was one management position that I gave. I said to hold the line, assume there's infrastructure, and if there's existing nourishment, continue the rates of nourishment. These can change in areas where it's applicable. Really, you see the effects of nourishment a lot in Southern California. It's not so much here where they had historically large nourishment events to really build out, like, say, Huntington Beach. It's not as big of an impact here. Rather than scrolling through that, what I'm going to do is bring up the flood extents again, and I'll show you what I was keying in on. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
The flood? Okay. So this was 1 meter of sea level rise and no storm. You can definitely see that already, even with 1 meter of sea level rise, it looks like the beach in the area that you're talking about is faring a little bit better than the southern end of the beach, where it looks like it's inundated already.
Correct.
Yeah. And even with a 100-year storm, it only infiltrates so far. And so as I was looking at what happened here, it looks like because there was accommodation space, the beach moved up and back because it could, whereas it did not have the ability to do that here, and it basically runs up against the bluff face.
Right. All of our seawalls are revetments.
Yeah, and if it helps, I'm just going to show an example of kind of what happens behind the scenes when we're doing this. So this is exactly what I was talking about. If you look at the dark line, or excuse me, the dotted line is the original beach profile. Say if we have a nice little tiny dune, which it does seem like you have some burn behavior there. When we translate it with each sea level rise scenario, this, if there's the ability to, it moves back and up. It's limited by the slope. It's limited by beach steepness, the angle of repose, and active beach width. So there are some physical parameters for limiting that. But if there's infrastructure there, at least for our flooding scenarios, we limit how far it can move back. It's limited by the angle of repose and how high it can get. And with enough sea level rise, that just gets overwashed, that just gets inundated. And with cliff retreat, again, with each sea level rise scenario, there's a certain, if there's cliff retreat, that material then gets eroded away and dumped and redistributed along the profile. So those are the effects that you see when you're looking at, oops, wrong one. I want to stop sharing. Those are the effects that you see when you look at the flood. Are you there? Are you when you're looking at the flood projections? Sorry, I have too many windows open. I'm trying to find you again.
Okay. My next question was, early in the presentation, you mentioned that we can expect to see more waves from the south rather than the north. And we see,
go ahead.
And we see, you know, both here.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that you meant to say, we will see the same number of waves, just they'll shift direction, as opposed to, so we see waves from the north swell because of north storms, like in the Gulf of Alaska, as opposed to atmospheric river storms that come from the south.
Completely.
So is that, you expect the storms to switch, or do you just expect there to be more storms from the south and the same number of storms from the Gulf of Alaska?
Right, so those storms from the Gulf of Alaska are going to be continuing, right? I'm not saying that there's suddenly going to be a huge swap of storm tracks, but there are going to be subtle differences in storm tracks. What I am saying is that while we don't expect the most extreme wave heights to change, right? Let's say, for instance, 6-meter waves, really extreme offshore, you know, at the Monterey buoy, we don't see a huge change in that wave height. Looks like we'll continue to see 6-meter wave heights. But with that 6-meter wave height, it does look like there's more of a southerly component to it. So the storm tracks may be subtly changing such that rather than coming from north-northwest, north-northwest, is coming from the northwest. It's actually, we saw like a little less than a 10-degree shift in it. And it does, we do have to say that the storm intensities in the southern hemisphere do change. We do see changes in the significant wave height in the southern hemisphere. So when you're looking at the southern swell that transits across the Pacific and that we see in our great surfing waves here, yes, those are going to increase. So there's going to be kind of two different elemental changes in our wave heights.
Okay. My next question is, and this is a little bit tangential, sort of, maybe. You included some diagrams sort of about halfway through the presentation that had to do, when you were talking about flood projections, you used the Carmel Lagoon, the Carmel River Lagoon. Okay. And yeah, I assume, do you know about the fact that the lagoon is like open some of the year and closed some of the year, and how that whole thing works? Were these projections sort of when the lagoon is open versus when the lagoon is closed, or?
Yeah, to get the full, yeah, we had to make a choice, right? So for most of our study area, we're covering counties wide. So we had to make a choice for a lot of these coastal estuaries and inlets that have very similar behavior. And we chose to open up the estuaries for our scenarios, mostly because it seems like a lot of estuaries would have some breakage event during the winter, right, with a significant plug of discharge that came down. And we felt it was better to account for that rather than being too restrictive in the influence of that coastal water level. So yes, we did open it up. It wasn't open in the elevation model.
So one of the things that the wastewater plant has here, the wastewater plant, our wastewater plant is in the lagoon. And one of the things that they have that to me, it sounds a little bit unsure, is we have one of those sort of seasonal berms that protects your word, the estuary from the ocean. And it's not clear to me how that berm is going to change as sea level rises. So as the sea level rises, will the berm sort of move inland and still be like 3 or 4 or 5 feet above sea level? And so will the level of water in the estuary also rise as sea level rises?
Yeah, so I actually listened to a talk from, she's at NPS. I forget how to say her name all the time. I'm so bad. Begins with an O, Marta. Anyway, she studies that. You've got some great academic, can you see that? Did I share? You've got some great academic resources in your backyard. Let me make sure I share now. Okay, you should see that. And then I'm going to display this. All right. So very similar to the accommodation space and the shifting beach that we talked about further north. You can see that reflection with the berm here. It's subtle, but can you see my mouse perchance?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I put that right here, this is kind of where the 100-year storm lies for present day sea levels. That moves back with the sea level rise. And so that's accounting for that accommodation space. So at least within our model, there was space for the berm to move back, and it did. Assuming there was and the model allowed for it. So that was a phenomenon that we saw in a lot of places, and it's not unreasonable here because there's that accommodation space to allow the beach to respond and the berm to respond to that. But I do know, based on, going back to what I heard from Marta, was that the opening and closing of that is driven by two things. It's driven by waves to build it up, and it's driven by discharge coming down. So it's the interplay between those two going forward to really describe how often that's going to break, if it's going to break, and the sediment load that will kind of preserve that feature. So I think this is a really complicated area. I think we can get some kind of maybe big takeaways from a model like this, but totally an area where you may want to do some more investigation and fine scale investigation. And I know you've got people looking at it already.
And the last question, you used a couple of models in your presentation here. Are those models available to the public to kind of screw around with, or are they internal to the USGS?
Which models are those? Sorry.
Your Cosmos model or whatever you use to do the modeling that you did. So for example, in the lagoon and whatnot. I know we have, so I'm looking at the people on the call, and I know a few people on the call would be interested in sort of screwing around with it and seeing what happens.
Yeah, well, so it's a very data-driven model. So if that's something that you're interested in, I can totally hook you up with Sean Vatusik and Pat Limber to see kind of what it is that you're trying to do. And maybe that's something that we'd want to explore together.
Okay.
But the tool is available online for people to mess
Results
with.
and projections of the tool are available online. Yeah, with all the scenarios that are there. Yep.
Great. So thank you. Really appreciate it. So comments or questions from members of the public? Yes, Libby. Libby?
If you're talking,
ahead, Libby.
Sorry.
Can you unmute yourself, Libby?
Hi,
Oh,
sorry.
there you go.
My mute thing kept popping up and down. Hi, my name is Libby Barnes. I'm an architect and I represent the AIA Monterey Bay. And I was curious about kind of, as an architect, we need to look at FEMA flood maps to understand setbacks for houses and structures on a property. Yeah. And so kind of looking to the future, does your data, and like FEMA's data or other data that the county uses to determine flood zones, will that go into kind of a future projection in terms of setbacks for buildings or even building standards in terms of controlling flooding of homes? Yeah,
this is a kind of a sticky situation that is brought up a lot. Our maps are not regulatory, and we are not meant to be regulatory. That's definitely FEMA's domain. And FEMA, to date, has not yet kind of adjusted their maps to account for sea level rise and changes in conditions coming in the next century. However, there are efforts underway to do so, and I know that is something that they're looking at. And there are other federal agencies that we're working with, such as U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to again look at either broader scales, different time scales in other areas for better maps of projections. I think it will still take partnership with FEMA to get regulatory maps for the type that you're looking at that account for sea level rise in the future. In the meantime, unfortunately, I think studies and just having a proactive and forward-looking committee such as yourselves is what you can do.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? So a quick question, since the subject of FEMA came up.
Yeah.
The FEMA maps presumably don't include. So we have homes along the shoreline in various places that are behind armor ring. Most of them are behind armor ring. A few of them are. Some of them are not. But the FEMA maps presumably don't include things like the collapse of cliffs or anything like that.
I don't think so. So I know that I think actually they do take some structural integrity into that because of the example of Foster City. Foster City's levees for a while were not accredited. And so the risk was definitely elevated and it took some time to update their levees. But I can't speak to the detail of how they account for that in there.
Okay. Before we say goodbye to Andy, thank you very much, Andy. That was really great. No more questions?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So Andy, your models take into effect the elevation and the cliffs of the beach dynamics?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So very interesting. So your models, even with sea level rise, the northern part of the beach seems to withstand, but the southern part of the beach is going to be inundated.
Yeah, that's a phenomena that we've seen elsewhere as well. If there was accommodation space for that beach to respond to changes in conditions, and there was the sediment to do so, then it did, right? It moved back and up if there was the space to allow it to do that. However, if there wasn't, and there was kind of an impingement on its ability to kind of naturally move with the changing conditions, then it got inundated. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent presentation. And the fact that you can go online and kind of do some scenarios is really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy.
Thank you. All right.
Anya, do you want to do our next introduction?
Sure. So our next speaker is Bob Harari, my boss. Bob has been our Public Works Director for the past 3 years. And he was with the City of Monterey. Prior to that, he was a Capital Programs Manager for the City of Monterey. He is a registered engineer in 3 states, has 38 years of engineering experience, and 28 years of which are in public agencies. And Bob's going to talk about our storm drain master plan that was recently completed earlier this year.
Great. Thank you very much, Agnes. Let me share the screen. Can everybody see that? I don't hear any response. Can anybody?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, this is the storm drain master plan. This is, if you think of the last presentation more of the macro level, this is more of the micro level. But anyway, we just completed the storm drain master plan by a consultant, and this presentation will mostly focus on the contents of the storm drain master plan, as well as what we anticipate climate change impacts will be. What is a master plan? The purpose of a storm drain master plan is it's really a guide for the planning, design, construction, operations, and maintenance of storm drainage infrastructure. This master plan included a development of a model of the existing storm drain system so that we can assess the physical condition of our system. We've identified bottlenecks and capacity limitations within the system, and we can now prioritize required improvements. This model also allows us to assess the impacts due to changing environmental conditions, such as climate change, as well as future development. Before we had the storm drain master plan, we had some concerns. So the concerns are listed on the left side of the table, and the potential impacts or issues are on the right. The first concern I had when I started here was that we had no prior master plan in the 104 years existence of the city of Carmel. So that certainly concerned me. So without a master plan, do we have a hodgepodge development of a system? The answer is yes. We also had whack-a-mole flooding. So when we have a flooding or a ponding issue in one location, sure, our public works crews can go out and add a berm or do some grading, do some modification at point A. The water's going to go somewhere else. It will flood at point B. So this master plan gives us an avenue so that we can more scientifically and methodically make the corrections that we need to do over time. And the second concern was that we didn't know what the capacity of our system even was. It's hard to do emergency preparedness if we don't know what we're going to have to respond to. With the master plan completed now, we'll get to that in a little bit, where we anticipate flooding. We also didn't know the physical condition of our system. So our system was, all the pipes underground were videotaped. And what we found, or what we could have found anyway, was that there's failures, sinkholes, flooding due to blockages. We also have to be very careful with our water quality in the city. So without knowing what the physical condition is, hey, any day there could have been a sinkhole and we would be totally surprised. Now we know where we might find such a thing. We also have a lack of easements for drainage maintenance and without getting into the legality of issues like that, we have water that's within the city right away that crosses above or below private property, and then it gets to the next street over before it goes, ultimately goes into the storm drain. So someday we need to get easements so we can properly maintain those things. We did last year, I believe we did a stream stability study just focusing on the creek at Mission Trails Nature Preserve. And we know we've had significant erosion over the years, and this is an environmentally sensitive habitat. So we addressed that with the master plan. We also have what we call underground streams. So over the many years, especially way back when the city was first being developed, we had canyons, we had hills and canyons. Apparently, some of those canyons did not put a pipe at the bottom of the creek, say, and now underground water kind of channels through that location into a mysterious way. We can't tell where exactly those streams end up or go. Although we do know one place, it ends up surrounding the Park Ranch Library. So without the equipment, the sump pumps that we have at the library, we could have basement flooding over and over and over. But now we can protect that with pumps. We had no idea what the cost of the repairs that were needed are. Now we have a cost estimates. Now we can budget in a scientific fashion for the capital improvement projects over the long term. And we didn't know how climate change would impact our storm drain system. And we all know that there'll be stronger storms, there'll be sea level rise, and increased flooding. So we had a lot of concerns, and we hired a consultant to prepare the storm drain master plan. And now we know what we're dealing with. This map is just really to orient you into our overall storm drain system. On this map, north is to the left. You can see the Carmel Bay on the bottom of the screen. The blue lines represent our storm drain pipelines. You can see in the northeast quadrant of the city, it doesn't look like a normal traditional grid format. There's things coming at very strange angles. Okay, so that's an area of concern, and we'll talk more about that later. We can see that we have a main storm drain / open channel along 4th Avenue on the left. The perpendicular line is Ocean Avenue, so we have a storm drain under that. And we have some meandering on the easterly side of town, which meanders from Junipero. It jogs over to Mission, it jogs back to Junipero, and then discharges into the creek at the Mission Trail Nature Preserve. So we'll talk more about all of those components later, but you can kind of see the big picture. Also on the southwest corner of the city, we see a lot of these culverts that go underneath the road at intersections, but they are not continuous. So we have essentially open channels along essentially the gutter in all of these areas along the southwest corner of the city, sorry. We also have known nuisance drainage concerns, a little bit of whack-a-mole, but these seems to be the ones that are most prevalent. So we have drainage concerns habitually when we have a significant rain at these locations. Not really a clear pattern, other than several of them are up in the northeast area of town where we have a very unusual arrangement of pipes. So part of the survey was to do a physical assessment. Like I mentioned, they videotaped all our storm drains, and everything was inspected. So going in the left column, pipes and box culverts, we have 271 pipe segments. So we have 6.5 miles of storm drain pipe today. This survey identified cracked pipes, broken liners, offset joints, sags, sediment, and even collapse. We have photos coming up that will show all that. Middle column, we have manholes, catch basins, and open channels. These sometimes are referred to as nodes, like a point in the system. We have sediment problems, especially under Rio Road. We have debris in catch basins. We don't want debris in catch basins because we are discharging to an area of special biological significance in Carmel Bay. I did that last one for Anya, so she can give me some points. We also have some deep manholes. We can't maintain those deep manholes because they're considered confined spaces. So we have to hire contractors to maintain manholes that are real deep. We have some open channels, say along 4th and I believe Junipero, where we have ongoing erosion problems. We have high maintenance because of all the vegetation that grows in these channels. And speaking of the southwest corner of town, we have the open channels and the water goes under those culverts at intersections, but we have pedestrian and parking safety issues at those locations. On the right column, the drainage outlets, we really have 22 different outlets, but 20 of them go directly to Carmel Bay. And we have a double box culvert that goes from Mission Trails under Rio Road to Carmel River. We have 4 undersized hydrodynamic separator units. These are big boxes, say, that separate water from trash and sediment. And this is required for water quality. And those are very expensive to replace, and that wasn't part of our particular part of our study. We have to clean those trash and sediment capture units. We don't have the equipment ourselves. We use COD to do that for us under an agreement. Of course, we have beach erosion and public safety concerns that I believe the last speaker more than adequately covered. And we have some minor contributing factor to undermining the seawalls along the bluff due to our locations of our outlets on the beach. Okay, so this is a map that shows where the physical defects are. They're shown in red. You can sort of see little spots, as well as quite a bit of issues here. Let's see, yeah, San Carlos and Ocean, kind of centered in that area. We have some real problems. Also, the box culverts under Rio Road are very much undersized and are filled with sediment, so we have some problems there as well. But you can see we have lots of little bits and pieces here and there to repair someday to fix our system. Here's some interesting photos. On the left-hand side, we see a concrete pipe. It's in pretty good condition today, but you can see longitudinal cracks. This is pipe that's going to fail somewhere down the road. It probably has 10 or 15, maybe even 20 years to it. But we want to replace this pipe or reline it before it fails. So if you recall the blue curve on our pavement condition type of assessment, we want to be replacing this pipe or repairing this pipe before it gets into rapid disrepair. On the right-hand side, it's too late. Here's somebody's tire on the left here. This looks to be like a corrugated steel pipe, but it's so damaged that the liner that's usually welded or pasted to the inside lining of the steel, it's completely fell off. You can see all the settlement, and this is part of our storm drain system. So water is not going to pass there. It's going to bubble up out of a manhole upstream of this location. On the left, we have a case where the pipe is sagging. So it's not only a water quality issue, it invites mosquitoes. It limits the amount of water that can pass through this location because it's already partially occupied. On the right is a bad day in a catch basin. There's a whole lot of debris. There should be none. Nothing should be flowing to our outlets on the beach except for clean water. On the left, we don't know exactly what we're looking at, but there appears to be another corrugated steel pipe that just has completely unraveled from appears to be at a joint. So we have 2 pieces of pipe that are not aligning up. Similarly, on the right-hand side, this is more obvious. These pipes should be all circular, straight alignment. Here we have a pipe that's coming in at an angle to this other pipe. So that's not that's not good. That's very bad. That's going to trap water and back up water upstream. A couple other miscellaneous defects. On the left, we have another concrete pipe, which is in excellent condition, except for at this joint. For whatever reason, this joint has been eroded by somebody or something, and now the steel rebar is exposed, and it will become rusted, and then that will crack the concrete and expose the next piece of rebar. So it's the beginning of a problem that shouldn't even be there in the first place. On the right-hand side, we believe this is a box culvert. and it's just completely filled with sand and gravel. We are not capable of cleaning this level of sand and gravel. We can clean our our catch basins and our culverts. We can't really clean out pipes that are far underground or far away between catch basins. Okay, moving to a different topic, the hydrology model. Hydrology is really the surface runoff. So when it rains, we want to measure where the water, how much water we get, where it's going. So this hydrology model selected a storm intensity of a 10-year storm, which would be 3 inches of rain in 24 hours. This is modeled after NOAA, and we believe our storm drain, for the most part, was designed for 10-year storm conditions. That's not good news. Most cities design their storm drains for 20 or more year storms. So what we believe happened was, over the years, we saved money by installing smaller pipes to handle a 10-year storm, and some of the repairs we can handle a 10-year storm. But most agencies, especially coastal agencies, have designed their storm drains for 20 years, some even 50 years, but I think that's overkill in my own opinion. We found out that a 10-year storm in the year 2045 would make that 3 inches of rain up to almost 3.5 inches of rain in 24 hours. And a 50-year storm in the year 2045 would be 5 inches of rain in 24 hours. So we'll talk more about how that impacts our system in a little bit. The model included 105 drainage catchment areas. Now, a catchment area is where it goes from peak to the most, what's the word, most downhill point. The peaks do not respect the city limits, so we have catchment areas beyond the city limits. The model is based on topography, which the FEMA maps are also very much based on the topography of the land. Hydrology is impacted by land use. So, for example, water flows off of pavement much faster than if it was percolating into soil. Also, the types of soil we have was considered, and water percolates pretty well under gravel or sand, doesn't do very well percolating into clay. But there is also the lag time. So if it were to rain all over town at one point, all the water is not going to instantaneously end up in, say, in the Carmel River. It's going to take time. So there's formulas and empirical equations that calculate the lag time that goes into when the water gets into all these particular locations. The consultant also used our city GIS data as well as data from the county. Their method was based on the National Resource Conservation Services hydrology method. They used software from the Danish Hydraulic Institute. That's pretty slick. And basically, we're really modeled it for 3 different outfalls, primarily Carmel Bay, which is the area of special biological significance, some water into Carmel River, and just a sliver that goes into Pescadero Canyon. So here's what we found as a result of the model. This is the yellow arrows are my own interpretation of what's in the report, but I think it's a pretty good graphic. If we look at the catchment area, I hope you can see my mouse. You see that we're beyond the city limits here. And so all the water from Highway 1 to the west is all coming into our city, and then the same thing for this pocket here. So this pocket here, we call it the arrow A, the yellow arrow A. That's a lot of water that's coming into right towards Junipero and Ocean. It's coming right at us. Fortunately, it's split off into 3 areas, B, C, and D. So some of that water goes into B, which is an open channel along 4th Avenue for the most part. Some of it goes in the underground in the pipe, and C, which is on Ocean Avenue. And the rest goes south on Junipero, jogs around Mission, and then goes back to end up in the Mission Trail Nature Preserve. So point E, here's the water, here's the creek within the Mission Trails. There's also that branch that we saw in the prior presenters' slides. The water from G and E is going to end up through F, which is undersized, but eventually it will end up in the Carmel River out here. And H and I represents the 7 streets along here that have all these little culverts that all end up in outlets. These are outlets, these little triangles. So this water in this area, and it's pretty steep, which is good news. It all ends up down here. And upside down J, because I can't rotate it, is water that goes into Pescadero Creek, just really from 2nd Avenue over, not much there. That was a hydrology model. Now we're looking at the hydraulic model, which emulates water that's once it gets into the pipes. So this count, or what criteria this includes, is pipe sizes. The types of pipe, for example, concrete pipe has a lot less friction than, say, you got corrugated steel pipe. So each pipe type has different flow characteristics. Pipe slopes and invert elevations. We've found that we have a couple of places where the pipes should always go downhill, from uphill to downhill. We have a few locations where there's a little peak and valley. It goes, the pipes go up before it comes back down again. So that just creates essentially the sagging situation where we have water and pipes that are stuck there. The hydraulic model is done as a network as a whole. It's not done piece by piece, pipe by pipe. It's a network as a whole. And of course, they factored in the culverts and the open channels. Here's the projects that we need to do to allow for the safe passage of a 10-year storm. The items in red are high priority, yellow is moderate priority, and green is low priority. I disagree with one of them over here, but anyway, we have a case here in this, remember the hodgepodge area. There's a bunch of different elements here that needs to be corrected to allow proper allowance for a 10-year storm. Here's the biggest priority is right here. Our water now goes down to Junipero, jogs over on the east side of Sunset Center, and then comes back. It's very bad for a main line to have a jog like that. That's just crazy. So their highest recommendation is to build this bypass line right here on Junipero, and that would really allow for a lot better flow into Mission Trail. Down here, Rio Road, this is the box culvert that are undersized that get filled with sediment, but it's an expensive project because we'd have to be reconstructing part of Rio Road. Essentially, we're making a bridge out of Rio Road over here. So on the left here is a table that identifies all the repairs, the high priority, medium, and low priority. The grand total of all of this, apparently you can't see on the screen, but it's $9.9 million. As we mentioned earlier, the Mission Street bypass was recommended as the top priority. These are relatively smaller projects. Junipero is really upstream of that bypass area, so there needs some work there. And Rio Road, that's that storm drain or the box culverts that I have a concern about. But that project alone is $2.4 million. But if we had the magic tree that grows money, we had $9 million to invest, we can make these repairs, and then a 10-year storm event for today, which is 3 inches, would pass Carmel, and we'd have essentially no flooding. Everything would go great. Unfortunately, we don't have the friends of the Carmel storm drain system, except we did find one. We found a feline called Bob the cat. It's confirmed that that cat's name is Bob. So it's my only friend in the storm drain business so far. Climate change. Okay, so for 10 years out, a storm at the years, I'm sorry, not 10 years out, at 2045, a 10-year storm with making all the improvements, the rainfall would be 3.48 inches, which is 16% higher than what we have for today. I would estimate that we're going to have a problem in Mission Trails, as we have in the past. Carmel River is going to swell, as we has in the past. And Andrea's model pretty much showed that there'd be some flooding in this area. So that's not really a surprise. But fortunately, that's pretty small or pretty low population. That's mostly a natural setting. My concern is right here in this area, the hodgepodge area. Fortunately, a lot of our streets are pretty steep. So water's going to run off the streets pretty well until it gets to this bottleneck. It's going to not be able to flow out fast enough, and it's just going to back up. It might not be exactly as this blue blob shows. It's going to be more like popcorn, but there will be problems in this area. We'll also have some problems on the southwest corner of town, especially at Scenic and Santa Lucia. So there's some concerns there as well. Also wanted to state that the predictions have a relatively high degree of uncertainty, because not only are we talking about the future, but we're also talking about climate change. But at least we have a general idea of what will happen in a 10-year storm with climate change. I also put here the sea level rise, and that's what the impacts that Andrea was talking about. So the two go hand in hand. 50-year storm in 2045. This would be about 5 inches over 24 hours, and that's a 17% increase from a 50-year storm today. We will have flooding. There's no question about it. Again, flooding is caused by bottlenecks, blockages, undersized pipes, undersized open channels. We know we're going to have quite the day down here at Carmel River. Rio would probably be washed out. Mission Trail will be pretty filled with water. Same thing with this branch. We're going to have problems all through here that need to be corrected. Just a lot of flow. I'm not concerned about this, but we're going to have some flooding and some flow down here to the Mescalero Creek. And this area will get a little bit more flooding. Yeah, I think that's it for that slide. And for conclusions, the Storm Drain Master Plan eliminates the fear of the unknown, especially my fear of the unknown. Storm drains were designed piecemeal over time, which is common. Our storm drains were designed as development occurred over time. There was not a master plan network, and that's proven by the fact that we have a hodgepodge system. That's not uncommon, okay? So like everybody else, we have a little bit of a hodgepodge. However, our storm drain system was only designed for 10-year storm events. It was less costly to install over the many years, but 20 years or greater is common. So we have an undersized system to begin with, right? And on the coast. Another conclusion: without any repairs, a 10-year storm today would cause minor flooding in a few areas, and we're kind of used to that. There was a storm that was almost, it might have been a 10-year storm a couple of years back, but it was significant. But there was minor flooding in just a few areas. We were able to clean up the mess in just a few days. We would need about $9.9 million in today's dollars to repair all the drainage system from the repairs and to end the bottlenecks to handle a 10-year storm today. Due to climate change, storms are expected to be up to 17% stronger by the year 2045. And the worst case is having a 50-year storm, even today, let alone in the future, would cause moderate to significant flooding and damage, especially in the northeast downtown area, as well as in the Mission Trail Nature Preserve in Rio and Carmel River. And the whole report, if you would like to review it, is available on the city website. And you just go to the Public Works homepage, and that's where you'll find it on the homepage. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Bob. It's good to see that our however many hundred thousands of dollars that the city spent on this have gone to good use. I see Carrie nodding over there too. So thank you for doing this. Any questions from committee members? Questions or comments?
I have a question, Bob, and by the way, good to see you again after several years. You mentioned the 4 pieces of equipment that help filter the water, the storm runoff. Where are those located?
Ines, maybe you could.
Yeah, I can take that one. So one is at the bottom of the 4th Avenue in San Antonio, near the little channel there. They're all underground, so you'll only identify them by sort of a large manhole cover. There's one at the bottom of Ocean Avenue, there's one at the bottom of 8th Avenue, and there's one at the end of 11th, at the entrance to Mission Trail Nature Preserve at 11th Avenue.
And we clean them every 6 months, I believe, correct?
We clean them 2 to 3 times a year, at a minimum 2 times a year, sometimes 3 times depending on how many storms we're getting.
Right.
They basically, I mean, the first storms usually fill them up with a lot of leaves pretty quickly. So we'll usually try to do 2 to 3 cleanings per year.
But if I understand it correctly, that doesn't account for a lot of the other locations where the storm water's entering, say, the bay or
yeah,
Carmel
so
River.
those were installed kind of in our primary drainages.
Right.
But any of the other sort of surface drainages have no treatment.
Thank you.
More questions? I have a few, Bob. First, I would say that my dog is very familiar with Bob the cat and knows exactly where Bob the cat lives and makes a beeline for Bob the cat's culvert every time we walk past there. So I can't say that I'm a big fan of Bob the cat. I think most of my questions revolve around the graphic on page 18, which is sort of the 50-year flood line. I think I can ask them all around that. Do you want to bring it? Yeah.
Yeah, give me a minute. Page 18?
Yeah, just the previous slide.
This one?
Yeah. So you mentioned that, you mentioned $10 million to accommodate sort of the 3-inch rain event. Is it possible to accommodate this 50-year rain event, or is that just too much water for us to ever bother with? So at some point we stop caring.
It would be many tens of millions of dollars to upsize our main lines to accommodate a 50-year storm. So essentially that ship has sailed. So I think we need to be able to address or be prepared to address such a storm or how we can recover from the storm. I don't envision us going pipe by pipe and upsizing them into something bigger, but the more we can at least make the corrections of the broken pipes, the known bottlenecks, the less of a flooding problem we will have at a 50-year event.
So this 50-year page that you have up, I see that, like, for example, you have sort of bypassed the Mission Street. It looks like it looks like this page takes into account most of the repairs that you have suggested in the $10 million 10-year plan.
Correct.
Is that right?
With the improvements, yes.
Okay. So, so you think that the 3-inch storm is like, it's sort of, and I'm sure you can answer this question more professionally when you give this presentation to the council, if you ever do that. But you think that 3 inches over a 24-hour period is what we should sort of plan to right now, rather than setting our sights a little bit higher to 3.5 or 4 inches?
Yes, we need to make those repairs, like when we saw the car tire squishing a pipe. We need to make those definite problem areas repaired first before we can really tackle 50 years.
But let me rephrase my question a little bit. So when we install, I guess, that Mission Street bypass on Junipero,
right?
The first $600,000 project or $800,000, whatever the cost was on that project, right, we would size that to a 10-year storm, or would we size that bigger to a larger storm?
I believe the cost estimates were based on sizing it for the 10 years because the rest of the system is 10 years. It would be prudent, especially on the main line like it is, to upsize it up, so at least over the many years, the more and more sections will be able to accommodate a 50-year storm. But it would cost. It would be a different cost.
Yeah, I would just say as a council member, that's probably a question you might be prepared for when you. So I'll ask you to write this down now, so we don't have to have this conversation before that.
All right.
Before that presentation, do we? My other question is, looking at this graph and some of the other graphs, everybody always talks about the problem of water draining to the preserve and getting under Rio Road and all that. It's a constant source of issues just everywhere that trickles upstream to everywhere.
Correct.
Do we consider at all the possibility of diverting some of that water to come down 4th Avenue or Ocean or something like that, where it might be easier to accommodate the water rather than sending it to the preserve? Does that ever come up?
There was some discussions with a consultant when we're talking about this. We have 0 pump stations. If we were to install pump stations, we could capture water and divert it into all kinds of different areas. We did not consider installing pump stations at this time, but that is a physical thing that could happen.
Near me and sort of uphill from me at the top of 4th, there are some pretty long underground pipes.
Right.
So we don't, at this point, we wouldn't consider like undergrounding a big pipe to divert some of the water into 4th Avenue. And 4th Avenue is already pretty full during big storms, so it probably just doesn't matter. But do we talk about doing like engineering, like bigger scale engineering projects than that, rather than just accommodating the topography that we have?
If we're talking about underground utilities, is always a very expensive item, and pump stations are expensive. So with lots and lots of funding, we could reconstruct the whole system. We could, and in fact, if we were to go 50 years, I'd go another nickel more and go to a 100-year storm event, so we don't have to worry about it ever. But this was assuming that funding is limited, and right now we have an all-gravity system. All the water flows by gravity. So again, we could put in lift stations or pump stations to modify how the water is diverted.
I'm watching Carrie again to see how she feels about this subject. I was watching her the other night when we were talking about sidewalk vending too. So, okay.
The other thing I was going to mention related to the drainage to Mission Trail Nature Preserve, the stream stability study that we did 2-3 years ago did have some projects to help address some of the drainage issues, and that would have the park actually be able to handle that runoff a little bit better,
right?
And sort of serve its purpose of being a little bit of a wetland too, and a bit of a floodplain like that. So
well, it's a natural creek, but it was relocated over time by people.
So are those, like Anya, you talked about the stream stability study, which I haven't seen in a while. Are those the projects identified in there sort of part of Bob's $10 million plan, or?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe they are.
Yes.
Okay. So if the council wanted to sort of get moving on this, we would just start picking off projects, after some appropriate review process, we would just start picking off the projects that you identified on this list.
All right. If I may, the third item in the green Mission Trail Preserve projects, the $940,000, that's a combined, I think there's 7 or 8 projects that are warranted along Mission Trail. We got that per capita park grant recently, council funding for the first 2 or 3 of those first projects in Mission Trail, especially down closer to Rio Road. So that will help. That's a step in the right direction.
Okay, great. Questions or comments from the public? Okay. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Also, maybe this is one quick thing. I've worked here at the city of Carmel. So if you ever have any questions about this, you know where to find me. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Bob. So the next item on our agenda is review, provide comments, or approve the summary sheet for the Monterey County Office of Emergency Services. And I'll say this, I apologize. I did notice that the fire summary sheet is not on the agenda. So I guess even though it was in the packet, and I've kind of marked that one up more than the OES one, but I guess, Agnes, we should wait in the interest of being correct on this. We should just put this off until next month. Is that agreeable?
Technically, you're correct, Jeff. Since it's not on the agenda, we really can't address it. So
we'll do that. We'll just do that, and we'll be good about it, and we'll just do it next month. This sheet was prepared. The OES sheet, I believe, was prepared by Evan. Is that right, Evan? No, it says Agnes.
It was me. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. No worries.
late to fess up there. Come on.
Yeah.
Dog was barking. Sorry.
So I thought I'll just start. I thought the sheet was completely A-okay on this, so thank you for putting it together. I would note that I think one of the things we might do on this sheet is you say in the bottom it says identify issues to do, and you have that task, which was to put projects into the hazard mitigation plan. And I was thinking while Bob was giving his presentation today that we have $9.9 million worth of projects that would probably fit into the hazard mitigation plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think we were planning on including those.
Yeah, so one thing we might do as we come across, as we go through this process, one of the things we might do is have this worksheet serve as a list of the projects, have this particular worksheet serve as a list of the projects that we've sort of identified through our work. And maybe we should go back. Maybe, Agnes, you could put some placeholders in here and we could track back to the worksheets that we've already done. And every time we do one of these worksheets, we could put appropriate entries onto this worksheet. Every time we do one of those other ones, we could put an appropriate whatever, just sort of maintain our list of projects here, so that by the time we're done, we have basically a list of $9.9 million worth plus anything else projects. So that might be a good place to do that.
So that's capital improvement monies or suggestions, right, Jeff?
I think so. I think it's, certainly the stuff we saw just now was capital improvement project budgets, and I guess everything, all of these emergency, all of these things that would fit on this list are probably CIP items.
Yeah, the hazard mitigation, yeah. It can provide funding for planning projects too. So if there was a study we wanted to do or something, we could include it in there.
Yes, some of them are probably not capital improvement project budgets. So for example, if we identified, the 4th Street outfall, let's assume it was in better shape than it is. I mean, it's in pretty terrible shape, but let's assume that it was in better shape than it is. We might replace the 4th Street outfall if it's damaged during a storm on this list. And that's not normally something that would be a CIP project, but it might be, an emergency sort of destruction project, whatever you wanted to call it. So I think the list would include all of the CIP things that we can think about, and then be maybe a little bit broader than that, emergency items.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay.
So I think that would be something to watch out for as we sort of proceed down this path. A good list to keep up to date.
Okay.
And that's my comment. Anybody else?
I thought it looked great. So I didn't have any edits or comments.
Okay. Any comments from members of the public? Nancy Toomey's holding her finger up, so that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Next on the list is provide updates on the outreach to community organizations and regional partners conducted to date. I don't have any updates.
Well, we gave her.
You guys, yeah.
Oh,
Right.
right.
We gave her presentation to the CRA.
All right, right. It
Thanks.
is available online.
Yes. Anybody else have any updates? Lynette, she had something come up, so that's why she's not here. I'm sure we could have heard from. She was doing several things with schools, so she's not here. Did Michael ever come in? No, I don't see Michael LePage. Do you guys? No. So, anybody else, Scott or John?
Yeah, this is Scott. I have, I don't think I mentioned that I spoke to the Monterey County Association of Realtors. I think I mentioned a couple, maybe to Jeff and Carrie, but not in front of the committee. So I can maybe just say a couple words about that. For me, it feels like an organization we want to reach out to when we start talking about strategies. So I don't know if it's something we need to engage with them on now, but I would say that their government affairs director, Scott Dick, is very interested. Assuming we get to starting to discuss about strategies that would touch upon anything that impacts real estate transaction, I guess I'd say. Mm-hmm. So he's very passionate. He has a lot to say about things like point of sale mandates, for example, vacant property taxes, anything related to the LCP that could impact property rights, any kind of disclosure requirements. So those are the sorts of topics that he'd be very interested to be at the table for, when we come to those sorts of things. And so I think I'll just, he will maybe just keep him in mind, and I would strongly suggest that we do bring him back, or bring him to the table, if you will, should we start touching upon those sorts of approaches.
Seems like a foregone conclusion that we will.
Okay.
Is he on our distribution list?
Yes, he is. I gave him the information should he want to be on the list.
Did I get his contact information to add him to our distribution list? I don't know that I did.
Yeah, I was a little hesitant just to put him on. I just asked, I have to go back and check. It was some time ago, but I think I said if he'd like to be on, to let you know. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to mention that we have, I think our next meeting, we are confirmed to have the Waste Management District and the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, and maybe PG&E.
Last I talked to them, yes, we were confirmed, but I'll take care. I'll do that tomorrow.
Okay, and the February meeting, it's possible that the AMBAG and the Central Coast Community Energy may want to have their presentations pushed off to March. So we'll work on figuring something else out for that meeting. They've
Okay.
had a lot on their plates. Well, the community energy has had a lot on its plate.
Yeah, they're going through some changes over there, so yeah. Uh-huh. Let's see. We'll have to put our heads together and see who else we can get then. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. John, did I see John still there? No. Yeah.
I'm still here.
Okay. All right. I don't think we have anything else on this one, do we?
Okay, so we have one more item. Review the June 2020 update to the California Adaptation Planning Guide.
All right. So this is a real short item. We were going to present it, I think, in September and then push it off a little bit. I just wanted to show you guys what the new guide, in very brief way, how the new guide looks. So let me use that.
Oh, while you're getting ready for that, we did present to the city council. That was the other thing we did, right, Jeff? And Anya's did.
All right. That's right. Presented to the city council and, and to the Forest and Beach Commission.
Oh, good.
How did that go? How did the presentation to the Forest and Beach go?
It went well. There was one very good question relating to how do we better collaborate with the other commissions on the work that we're doing and that will sort of affect them, and whether we had thought about how we wanted to, sort of work together with the other commissions. Probably Forest and Beach Commission and Planning Commission are the two that may be affected by some of the proposed strategies. But they were very interested in the topic and very eager to work together with our group.
And you used the presentation that you gave to the council, right? Or mostly that presentation?
Yeah, pretty much the same presentation.
Good.
So, yeah, they're very interested in being kept in the loop on any.
Do you have any suggestions for us as to the answer to that question? Are we doing the right thing to sort of give updates to them and solicit feedback? Is there something more or different that we should be doing?
I think that's a good way to go. Once we start coming up with, ideas, I think we may want to potentially do updates maybe more often for some of those commissions. Otherwise, combined meetings might be kind of unruly. So I would recommend probably doing, those updates being the way forward. Unless anyone else has a good idea.
I thought that both of the presentations today were particularly appropriate to Forest and Beach. So I don't know if it would be a violation of decorum for you to. Or you're probably the staff member that does Forest and Beach, so maybe not. To send them sort of a notice that we have these two presentations, and maybe they should just watch them.
So what I could do is I could ask the commission members if they want to be included on our distribution list, and then they would have the notifications. I know JC from the Forest and Beach Commission is on the distribution list.
When are we going to present to the Planning Commission? Give them an update.
That's a really good question. I mentioned it to Bob after the Forest and Beach Commission, saying, maybe we should present to the Planning Commission.
I thought there was an item on there to do that. It was kind of the same.
Well, Michael was trying to coordinate that, but since he's the chair, does he help with the agenda items?
Yes.
So
right, Evan?
The commission can direct staff to include items on the agenda, but it's typically the director who sets the agenda for each meeting.
Maybe
I can
Evan-
contact Marnie.
yeah, talk to
Or
Mark.
Evan can contact Marnie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and Michael to kind of coordinate that. That would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So getting back, are we done with that item?
Yes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
worries. No worries. So getting back to the adaptation planning guide. So this is version 2.0. You guys can see my screen, right? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't see anybody when I'm presenting, so. That's the second version of the guide that has come out. It came out in June of 2020. So the great thing about it is it's using the same planning phases as the first guide. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but what they are doing is they are really integrating all the rest of the statewide efforts that have happened since the issuance of the first planning guide into this new guide. And so the graphic on the right shows all of the statewide efforts that have, really that have happened or really gotten much bigger since the issuance of the first guide. And there's quite a few reports and documents and resources available. So Safeguarding California Plan is one of them. The Climate Adaptation Clearinghouse is a repository of various documents and plans and reports done throughout the state by state agencies as well as local ones. There's the fourth climate change assessment. There's the California General Plan Guidelines. There's FEMA Local Mitigation Planning Handbook. There's the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. And there is the CalAdapt website that constantly or continuously updates modeling efforts. So the new guide really relies on a lot of these other documents to provide additional resources for people doing adaptation planning. It also has a pretty significant focus on equity and provides guidance based on all the new resources that they provide. So that's kind of the overarching. So it's not really a big change to how the guide is organized. It just provides a lot more resources associated with it. It also has an appendix that has example strategies by sectors. So sectors including like energy sector, forest, land use. And this isn't meant for you guys to read in detail, just kind of gives you a feel for how the strategies are broken down. So this is the energy sector, climate hazard being extreme heat. And so an adaptation strategy that proposed is minimizing stress on the electrical grid with a lot of like factors to consider, things that could be done. It provides what category of action that is, whether it's capital improvement or programmatic planning or regulations, and provides, sector overlap with other sectors, who the responsible agencies might be, where funding might come from, and example of resources that might be available to help plan this. So the thing that's really great about the new planning guide is now it's also integrated into the adaptation clearinghouse, which is at resilientca.org. And I will show you what that looks like. That website is really great, makes it a little easier to, makes it a little easier to digest the adaptation planning guide, which is a huge document. It's like 300 pages long, so hard to read just, on a one-time thing. But the website makes it really easy to digest and to get information for each of the issues that we might be interested. So you see the 4 phases that we're using in our planning process. And if you want to go to APG Online, these phases show up again. Say, I want to look for information on assessing vulnerability. I click here. So there's all the chapters of the guide are included right there. If you want to delve into all these, and under overview, actually, it shows you can have access to all the resources that relate to vulnerability assessment. And this is where I think it's really helpful, is so for vulnerability assessment, there's 530 different documents we could look at that would be a resource, which is way more than I want to review. So, but we can drill down to say, I want to look at extreme storms, and I want to, I'm mostly interested in how they will affect land use and community development and maybe ocean and coast. And so now we've narrowed it down to 83 results. And if I want to focus on the Central Coast area, we've narrowed it down some more to now 5 results. And I can download these reports as an example to look at. And there's a lot of really good information in there. And also there's also interesting, under public agencies, you can also narrow it down by whether you want reports that were created by local agencies or state, etc. In this case, there's only 1 result created. So that's the adaptation planning guide in a nutshell, the new one. I would strongly encourage everyone to go to resilienceca.org and kind of play around with it. I think they've really tried to make it user-friendly. And let's see, they've really tried, I'm trying to stop sharing, but, oh, there it is. They've tried to make it very user-friendly, and as hard to digest 300 pages is, I think they've done a good job of breaking it down into digestible sections.
Do you think there's stuff in that guide that if we comb through it could inform, the remainder of our project over the course of the next, 18 months?
Yes, I think so. I think we should definitely refer back to some of their recommendations when we start putting together our vulnerability assessments and our strategies. I think there's a lot of really good information in there.
Maybe we could, maybe for next month, we could have a discussion about, I'm going to watch Carrie's face again, assigning different sections of this to the different community members, so we could sort of update our planning, maybe get everybody a little bit involved in the project planning part. Maybe Agnes and Carrie and Evan and I could take a pass at that this month, just sort of thumb through it, and then we could make some assignments, some reading assignments next month.
That way, we could dive in a little bit.
Yeah.
Get educated. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with that, Jeff.
I guess I should be looking at John Hill and Scott to see if they're okay with it.
This way, cut the video off, right?
Too late.
Too late.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any more questions from the committee members? Any questions from the public? Members of the public?
We're ahead of the game today.
Yeah, half an hour ahead, so we didn't need to start early.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's it. Our next meeting is on January it's late. January the 21st.
Yep.
And we will see everybody then. Thank you, Jay and Libby and Nancy and everybody else, Laura and everybody else for coming. It's great to see you guys every month. And we'll see you in 5 weeks.
2021.
2021, it's a new year.
Yeah. God knows we want one of those.
Happy holidays, everyone.
All right.
Good holiday, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holiday.
Do.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.